Okay, let me go to Abdel Bari Atwan in London. Abdel Bari Atwan, you've heard there that, you know, you did not experience what it was like as an Iraqi to be living under Saddam Hussein. How do you respond to that?
Do we have to be, you know, living under Saddam Hussein to understand the damages inflicted on this country? Do we have actually to be there? And yes, he is a dictator, no question about that. But, you know, to defend the occupation of your country, this is the biggest sin, to be honest. You know, this is invasion. Millions of people demonstrated in London and other parts of the world, and they were not actually living under Saddam Hussein rule. They were against this war. So shall we say those people actually ignorant, stupid, for example? I'm really surprised. And look at the situation now. You know, the United States, for example, which invaded Iraq, which occupied Iraq, which divided Iraq according to the sectarian line, now is complaining about the Iranian influence in Iraq and the Iranian danger in the Middle East. And they are planning a war against Iraq and against Iran. And they want to abrogate the nuclear deal. So who actually made Iran strong? Who gave Iraq to Iran? It is this invasion, the American invaders. Yeah, I'm surprised Ms. Rand is defending this kind of the outcome of this occupation. Daesh or Islamic State, who actually create the environment for it to actually to be that strong and to establish its Islamic State, its caliphate in half of Iraq and half of Syria. The whole, you know, the whole country collapsed in front of those few people. So I'm really, what I want to say, yes, Saddam Hussein was a dictator, but how many people killed Rand? Million people by this invasion, by this war. Did Saddam Hussein kill 1 million people of your
Wait, hold on.
That's the question. I would like her to answer this question.
I don't understand how you can, you're confusing the issue, Mr. Abdel Bari. I'm sorry to say, you're completely confusing the issue. The problems that started in Iraq, and indeed there were problems, and indeed a lot of people were killed. But you know what? In the end, it is the question of what happened after the fall of Saddam Hussein and the mistakes that were made both by the US and by the Iraqis who took over. I think the gentleman in Erbil, my friend in Erbil, has been very right about this, that the Iraqis that took over did not do a good job, but that is the problem of the Iraqis. I think you're conflating a lot of issues about this, and also you're changing the subject about the intrusion of Iran
I want to go to Erbil.
Iraqi politics.
All right,
Let us try to pass the issue.
I want to go to Erbil, to Hiwa Osman. Hiwa Osman, we just heard there that Saddam Hussein was a dictator, and I think it's generally acknowledged that human rights were being violated in Iraq under Saddam Hussein. But in hindsight, would it not have been better for Iraq to deal with its own internal issues rather than have the United States stage this massive military intervention and enforce regime change?
Look, for the time, when it happened, it was the only option. It wasn't the best option. Back then, 2003, toppling Saddam Hussein with an international force was the only option for the people of Iraq. It was not the best option. I must stress on this. One more thing to our anti-war friends in the West. You know, every year on the 9th of April, the whole world goes on demonstrations against the toppling of Saddam Hussein or against the war. The only place that does not commemorate that or that does not demonstrate against that, what happened, is in Baghdad or in the rest of Iraq. You know, people of Iraq remember that 9th of April was a historic day. The only gain I can say that we gained in Iraq since 9th of April, since the toppling of the former regime, is freedom of speech. And to this day, you do not see the kind of criticism that we heard from California or from other places that toppling the regime was a war crime, was that. All the criticism that happens in Iraq today is criticism directed at the way the Americans' civil administration managed Iraq after 9th of April 2003 and the way the people who came into power through elections, through all of what happened after that, and this. And I ask all our friends who are anti-war and who are still saying that toppling the Saddam regime was a mistake. Few years after that, the Arab Spring started throughout the Arab world. I will just ask them to imagine what the death fields would have been like if Saddam Hussein was still there and the people of Iraq rose against the regime of Saddam Hussein and his sons. You're seeing what's happening in Syria. This would have looked like a picnic by comparison to what's going on in Iraq.
All right, Hiwa, let me get the response from Richard. Richard, you've just heard there that we hear and see these anti-war campaigns all over the world, but as Hiwa Osman just pointed out, we don't see it in Iraq.
Well, I'm not aware of demonstrations happening everywhere on April 9th all over the world. I don't think that's true. But I think the more important point is that Iraq posed no threat to the United States. The United States invaded Iraq. It violated international law by doing so. If the United States was concerned about other countries and dictatorships and the lack of human rights, maybe they would invade Saudi Arabia and overthrow it. Instead, we have MBS, as he's called, visiting and being feted in Washington as a great reformer. People have no rights whatsoever in Saudi Arabia. There's never been an election, ever. So, the idea that the United States did this for that reason or to benefit the Iraqi people is the furthest thing from the truth that there could be. It was a violation of international law. It was a war crime to launch that war. And it was a war crime to impose on Iraq the sanctions blockade that starved to death, that probably killed 1.5 million people before the 2003 invasion began. So the crimes of the United States against Iraq are enormous crimes, among the worst crimes in history. And yet, the people who carried out those crimes, who carried out that policy, today live in luxury. They go on the shows, they play golf, they do painting, as Bush does, and they walk free. While I think that the great majority of people in Iraq are still suffering greatly from the wars that the United States and the sanctions blockades that the United States has waged against that country.
Okay, Abdel Bari Atwan, how is the United States now viewed in the region? Did this war damage U.S. credibility in the Middle East?
Yes, I believe it did, because the United States actually, used this big lie of weapon of mass destruction in order to destroy a country, a stable country at least. As I said, I'm not defending the regime. It was, as I said, a dictatorship, and Saddam Hussein record of human rights, one of the worst in the whole region. But I would like, just if you allow me, I would like to answer Mr. Osman and Erbil. He said nobody is celebrating or commemorating, actually, the fall of the regime there. I would just like to remind him that Iyad Allawi, who was actually one of the architects of the Iraqi invasion or the American invasion of Iraq, he said clearly, people in Iraq are longing for the days of Saddam Hussein because of the worst situation they are going through now. And I don't believe Iyad Allawi actually is saying a propaganda or something, or defending a regime which he thinks it is the best regime for the Iraqis. So this is one point. Second point is, the American credibility, the American image in the Middle East, completely distorted. But let me complete, please. Let me complete.
Go ahead.
So it is, America now, look, they committed two grave mistakes, actually, or three grave mistakes. The first one, they destroyed Iraq, and Iraq is a failed state now. Second, they intervened in Libya and destroyed a stable state there, a stable government. And we had Mr. Obama, President Obama, saying that the only thing he regrets in his two presidential terms is the intervention, military intervention, and supporting the NATO intervention in Libya. And the third mistake now, United States actually spent $70 billion, $70 billion, B with B, not with M, $70 billion in Syria to arm and to finance, the people, the armed groups in Syria.
Okay.
What is the outcome? We have another failed state in a way or another. So, how can you see the American image is rosy in that part of the Middle East after all this destruction and after all this death? And I agree with Richard in California that before even the war of 2003, at least 1.5 million Iraqi were killed because of the sanction, which imposed for 12 years on the Iraqi people. They starved to death in that part, and nobody paid attention for this tragic situation.
Okay, Hiwa Osman, go ahead and respond, and I'd appreciate it if you could keep it short. We're running out of time here.
I'm really not defending the current regime. I'm only saying for the time back in 2003, given the mass killing, the destruction that Saddam's regime inflicted on the people of Iraq, to them, the war to remove him was the only option. It was not the best option. Today's regime in Iraq is sectarian, is corrupt, is incompetent. This is all not, I would not say that this is a direct result of what happened by the Americans. It is the direct result of the destruction to society, to the Iraqi person that was inflicted by the former regime of Saddam. He created a sectarian setup whereby we are still suffering from the reverberations of that. Today, the current people who are in government have no relationship to the Americans. They came through elections, but the Iraqi society has become extremely sectarianized by the negligence of the Americans afterwards, and by this is the aftermath of 35 years of Saddam Hussein.
Okay, let me go to Rend Al-Rahim. Rend Al-Rahim, let's look ahead here. Clearly, there are divisions, but let's look ahead. What is your assessment of the political leadership in Iraq since 2003? We have an election coming up in May. What's your hopes there?
Yes, I mean, I agree completely with Mr. Athman, with Hiwa, that unfortunately Iraq has had a very bad collection of political leadership. The upcoming elections, one of the things that people outside Iraq don't realize is the dramatic change in Iraqi society that has been taking place over the last 10 years, and that is at the grassroots level and among the youth, the increasing anti-sectarianism, the increasing liberalism among young people, the move away from religious politics and the mixture of politics and religion.
Right.
I think that in the coming elections, we are going to see breakthroughs. We're going to see movement away from that. And I have just come back from Baghdad, actually, just come back from Iraq. And it's palpable. People want change. They understand that the politicians haven't served them well. They understand that Iraq needs to move on to better politics. And I think the political class is beginning to respond. We hear much more talk about secularism in government. We hear much more about personal freedoms. We hear more about being part of the world rather than being enclosed. And of course, the issue of corruption, and everybody's against it. I do think that the coming elections, we may not have 100% change, but I think we are beginning to grapple with issues. And my faith in the younger generation, which is completely globalized. I mean, they're on the internet all day, every day on social media. They understand things. I think this is going to be the beginning of a breakthrough and a process of change. I do hope so. And what I saw in Iraq, and I travel there often, is a gradual process that's building up. And hopefully the elections will be the beginning of it.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington. Thanks for joining us.